Beloved chosen one, this is the moment you finally understand that your survival was never small in the sight of heaven. You may have looked at your life and thought that because you were still tired, still healing, still carrying the weight of what nearly crushed you, nothing worthy had happened yet. But heaven does not measure victory the way people do. Earth often celebrates the loud finish, the public reward, the visible breakthrough, the applause that follows a triumph everyone can see. Heaven also watches the hidden moment when you could have surrendered, when your strength was almost gone, when your heart was bruised and your mind was exhausted, and still you decided not to let go. That decision mattered more than you know. That choice shook the unseen realm. That act of endurance became a testimony before God long before it became a story anyone else could recognize. You remember the pressure. You remember how long the night felt. You remember what it was like to carry pain that nobody could fully read on your face. There were days when you kept moving, but inside you were asking how much more you could hold. There were moments when disappointment sat on your chest like a weight, when silence felt heavier than noise, when prayers seemed to rise into a sky that gave no immediate answer. And yet, even there, something in you refused to completely bow. You bent, but you did not break. You wept, but you did not disappear. You were wounded, but you did not agree with the lie that your story was over. That is why this message finds you now. Not because you were perfect in the fight, and not because you never felt fear, but because you stayed in the battle long enough for heaven to mark your endurance. There is something sacred about the soul that keeps showing up after being hit again and again. There is something holy about a person who keeps whispering yes to God when life gives them every reason to become cold, bitter, numb, and unreachable. You have been tempted to think your endurance was ordinary, but it was not ordinary at all. It was costly. It required tears nobody saw, prayers nobody heard, and decisions nobody applauded. It required you to keep trusting when evidence was thin. It required you to hold your peace when part of you wanted to collapse into frustration. It required you to get up after nights that drained every ounce of certainty from your heart. That kind of endurance is not accidental. That kind of endurance is what happens when grace is working in you even before you fully understand what God is preserving you for. You did not give up, and that matters. It matters because there were real moments when giving up would have been easier. It would have been easier to shut your heart down. It would have been easier to stop expecting good. It would have been easier to let pain rename you. It would have been easier to say that what was broken would never heal, that what was lost would never be restored, that what delayed would never arrive. But you are still here, and your being here is not a minor detail. Your being here is evidence. It is evidence that darkness did not get the final word. It is evidence that the pressure did not own you. It is evidence that what tried to bury you only revealed that there was still breath, still fire, still calling, still purpose left inside you. Chosen one, there are battles you win with a shout, and there are battles you win by simply refusing to quit. This was one of those battles. It was won in fragments, in quiet decisions, in private resistance, in moments where no crowd stood around you to say, keep going. You had to become your own witness for a while. You had to remember what God spoke when circumstances contradicted it. You had to carry a promise through weather that did not match the prophecy. You had to keep one small flame alive through winds that seemed determined to put it out. And even when you felt weak for struggling so long, heaven saw something else. Heaven saw loyalty. Heaven saw courage. Heaven saw a child of God still standing in the ashes, still breathing under pressure, still refusing to sign an agreement with despair. That is why you cannot call this chapter a failure. The fact that you were attacked does not mean you lost. The fact that you were shaken does not mean you were abandoned. The fact that you cried does not mean you lacked faith. Sometimes faith is not loud. Sometimes faith is a trembling voice that says, "I am still here." Sometimes faith is choosing not to destroy what God told you to protect. Sometimes faith is one more prayer, one more day, one more step, one more act of obedience when your emotions are begging for escape. And the beauty of heaven's perspective is this: God knows the difference between a soul that is weak and a soul that is unwilling. You may have been weak, but you were still willing. You may have been tired, but you were still available. You may have been stretched thin, but somewhere deep within, you still left room for God to move. So let this settle into your spirit. What you survived was seen. What you endured was counted. What you resisted was recorded. The nights were not wasted. The tears were not wasted. The waiting was not wasted. Even now, as you listen to these words, there is a holy reframing taking place. You are no longer looking at yourself only through the lens of what hurt you. You are beginning to see yourself through the lens of what God carried you through. That changes everything. It changes the way you name your past. It changes the way you read your scars. It changes the way you step into tomorrow. Because once you realize heaven celebrated the fact that you did not surrender, you stop calling yourself unlucky and start recognizing that you were guarded, kept, and sustained for something greater than the battle itself. If this word is speaking directly to your spirit, comment 222 as your sign that you did not quit when the battle tried to erase you. And now, before the story moves any further, receive this truth with full force. You are not behind because you needed time to survive. You are not less anointed because the fight was fierce. You are not forgotten because the answer took longer than expected. You are still chosen, still covered, still being shaped in places no eye can see. The battle did not prove that heaven was absent. The battle revealed that heaven was watching with intense attention, and that your refusal to give up was more precious than you know. This is why your soul feels this message so deeply. Something inside you recognizes it. Something inside you knows that what looked like mere survival was actually a holy victory in motion. And this is only the beginning of what heaven has to say about the battle you thought nobody noticed. The battle almost broke you, and that truth does not weaken your testimony. It deepens it. There is no need to pretend that you moved through the fire untouched, because that is not how real endurance works. You felt the weight. You felt the pressure. You felt the slow drain of hope when the fight lasted longer than your natural strength could explain. There were hours when your mind was tired, your heart was sore, and your spirit felt like it was standing in a narrow place with no easy way forward. You were still breathing, still moving, still trying to hold your place. But inside, something was trembling. That is why this battle felt so severe. It was not only testing your patience, it was testing your will to remain. What nearly broke you was not always one dramatic moment. Sometimes it was the repeated strain. Sometimes it was the silence after prayer. Sometimes it was the loneliness of carrying something sacred while looking outwardly unchanged. Sometimes it was the ache of wondering why a chosen life could feel so bruised. You asked questions you never thought you would ask. You reached emotional edges you never expected to reach. You discovered that there are forms of weariness deeper than the body, where the soul itself starts begging for relief. Yet even there, with all that pressure pressing close, You did not fully let go. That matters more than you know. This is where Elijah begins to walk naturally beside your story, not as a forced example, but as a living witness to what it means to be used by God and still come dangerously close to collapse. Elijah was not weak. Elijah was not faithless. Elijah stood in power. He confronted corruption. He spoke with authority. He called down fire. He faced darkness openly. And yet after a great victory, he entered a place so low, so drained, so stripped by fear and exhaustion, that he ran into the wilderness and asked to die. That is how deep the battle can go, even in the life of someone clearly marked by heaven. That is why your struggle should not be misread. Intense warfare does not prove that you have lost your place with God. Sometimes it proves the opposite. Sometimes the fiercest pressure comes after you have stood faithfully, after you have obeyed, after you have poured out what heaven gave you to carry. Elijah had already seen the power of God move in undeniable ways, yet he still found himself under the crushing force of emotional and spiritual exhaustion. In that moment, his earlier victory did not cancel his later weakness, and his weakness did not cancel his calling. That is important for you to hear. The battle almost broke you, but your breaking point was never the same thing as your ending point. You know what it is to keep going beyond what felt sustainable. You know what it is to act strong while feeling hollow. You know what it is to wonder how someone chosen for purpose can also feel so fragile. Elijah knew that mystery too. He knew what it was to move from public fire to private emptiness. He knew what it was to stand in boldness one day and then sit in despair the next. That is why his story fits this moment so well. It tells the truth about the inner life of a servant under pressure. It shows that heaven does not turn away the moment your strength fails. It shows that God knows how to meet a weary soul without shaming it. And maybe that is part of what makes this battle so hard to explain. On the outside, people may have expected you to keep shining without interruption, keep believing without strain, keep serving without fatigue. But heaven saw the hidden cost. Heaven saw the place where courage and exhaustion collided. Heaven saw the effort it took for you to remain present when everything in you wanted to escape. That is the sacred part of your story. You were not untouched, but you were preserved. You were not untroubled, but you were kept from disappearing into the trouble. Elijah's story reveals something profound about how God responds to a soul on the edge. God did not meet Elijah first with condemnation. God met him with care. He allowed him to rest. He provided what he needed. He sustained him in weakness before speaking direction into him again. That means heaven is not confused by your humanity. God is not alarmed by the fact that the battle affected you. He already knows the dust of your frame. He knows how long the road has felt. He knows how much resistance has surrounded what you carry. And still, he has not removed his hand from you. One verse captures the tenderness and nearness of God in a way that speaks directly into this moment. We find in 1 Kings chapter 19, verse 12, "And after the fire came a gentle whisper." That whisper matters. It means God was still present after the fear, after the running, after the collapse, after the noise, after the inner storm. Elijah was not abandoned in his lowest place. He was found there, and you are being found there too. So when you say the battle almost broke you, hear the deeper meaning hidden inside that sentence. Almost is not the same as completely. Almost means the pressure came close, but it did not own your future. Almost means the darkness pushed hard, but it still failed to erase what heaven placed in you. Almost means you reached the edge, yet grace was already there before you fell beyond recovery. That is what happened with Elijah. And that is what has been happening with you. This part of your story is not proof that you are disqualified. It is proof that your life is happening in the real terrain of spiritual conflict, where even strong servants can grow faint and still be carried. Like Elijah, you are learning that being chosen does not mean being made of stone. It means being held by God through moments that would have destroyed you if His mercy had not come close. The battle almost broke you, but heaven did not let the breaking have the final word. Instead, God preserved your breath, guarded your purpose, and kept a quiet fire alive in you for what comes next. Heaven watched every hidden tear, and that is not just a beautiful thought meant to comfort you for a passing moment. It is the truth about what happened in the hours nobody else saw. In the private strain, in the inward breaking, in the silent places where your heart carried more than your face revealed. Some tears fell openly, but many stayed hidden inside your chest as pressure, ache, disappointment, and longing. Some came at night when the world was quiet. Some came in prayer when words became difficult. Some never fully reached your eyes because they remained in the soul as a heaviness too deep to explain. Yet none of it escaped heaven's notice. God saw every hidden tear, every silent sorrow, every inward struggle that never found a public language. That matters because one of the harshest lies in spiritual warfare is the suggestion that private pain is somehow less important than public pain. The lie whispers that if no one sees your tear, then they must not count. If no one understands your exhaustion, then perhaps it is not real enough to matter. If your battle is mostly internal, then perhaps it is not worthy of divine attention. But heaven does not think the way wounded human fear thinks. Heaven does not wait for public evidence before assigning worth to your pain. Heaven sees with clarity what earth often misses. God reads the heart, the pressure, the cost, the endurance, and the quiet acts of survival that nobody else applauds. This is why Elijah's story continues to fit your own so naturally. After the fire, after the public confrontation, after the visible display of divine power, there came the hidden collapse. There came the lonely road, the drained spirit, the inward unraveling that no crowd stood near enough to measure. Elijah knew what it meant to move from a dramatic victory into a deeply personal valley. He knew what it was to have heaven's hand on his life and still feel emotionally emptied by the intensity of the battle. This is important because it tells you that hidden sorrow does not cancel a holy calling. Private tears do not erase divine purpose. Deep weariness does not mean heaven has stepped back. You know this kind of hidden chapter. You know what it is to carry pain that cannot be neatly explained. You know what it is to speak with people while holding back the full story of what is happening inside. You know what it is to keep going while part of you is quietly pleading for relief. That hidden burden has weight. It has cost. It has history. And heaven has been watching it all with an attention more tender than you realize. While others saw fragments, God saw the full picture. While others interpreted only your surface, heaven understood the deeper strain. There is something holy in realizing that you were never alone in those moments, even when loneliness wrapped itself around your thoughts. Elijah sat in his low place feeling the depth of his own exhaustion. But heaven did not misread him. Heaven did not step away because he was no longer standing in visible strength. Heaven stayed close. Heaven remained attentive. Heaven dealt with him according to mercy, not according to performance. That is part of what makes this message so healing for your spirit. You are being reminded that God does not only honor the powerful version of you, He remains near to the tired version, the bruised version, the stretched version, the version of you that could barely explain what was happening but still had not completely walked away. This is where many chosen ones misunderstand themselves. You think your tears are proof of weakness when often they are proof of the cost of staying tender in a harsh battle. You think your inward sorrow means something is wrong with your faith, when sometimes it simply reveals how fiercely your soul has been fighting to remain open, obedient, and alive under pressure. Elijah's hidden collapse did not mean his earlier obedience was false. It meant he was human, deeply affected, and in need of divine care. The same is true for you. Your hidden tears do not erase the strength that brought you this far. They reveal the depth of the battle and the mercy that kept you in it. And that is why heaven's attention changes everything. What human beings overlook, God does not overlook. What others forget, God does not forget. What others cannot interpret, heaven already understands. God knows which tears came from disappointment, which came from fear, which came from fatigue, and which came because hope itself had become painful to hold. He knows the tears you cried because you were tired of carrying so much in silence. He knows the tears that came when you almost gave up. He knows the tears that came because something in you still wanted to believe, even after repeated strain. None of it was lost. None of it was dismissed. None of it was treated as small. So let this settle into you with gentleness. Your hidden tears mattered. The private ache mattered. The strain you could not explain mattered. Heaven was not absent from those moments. Heaven was bearing witness to them. Heaven was near while you fought battles no one else knew how to name. And because heaven saw them, those tears are not meaningless memories scattered across a difficult season. They are part of the sacred record of what it cost you to stay in the fight. That is why this part of your journey should not be reduced to simple sadness. It was deeper than sadness. It was the place where your soul learned what it meant to be seen by God without needing to perform for that attention. It was the place where your pain, your weariness, and your longing stood uncovered before heaven and were still met with mercy. Elijah lived that mystery, and so have you. The hidden place became a meeting place. The private tears became part of a holy conversation between your exhausted heart and the God who never stopped watching. And if this message is reaching a place in you that once felt invisible, let that quiet recognition move outward in a simple way. You can like, share, and subscribe so this word can reach another person who has been carrying hidden sorrow in silence. And for those who feel led to support this work more deeply, there is also a donation link in the description, helping this kind of encouragement continue to find weary hearts at the moment they need it most. So you do not need to call your hidden tears wasted. You do not need to label that secret ache as forgotten. Heaven watched every tear, every sigh, every silent struggle, and every moment you held yourself together by grace. What was hidden on earth was never hidden above. What was private to others was fully visible to God. And now, as this story keeps unfolding, you are beginning to understand that even your quietest pain was witnessed with tenderness, guarded with mercy, and woven into a greater testimony than you could see while you were still crying through it. This was not just your fight, even though it often felt intensely personal. The pain landed in your body, the pressure settled in your thoughts, the fear tried to speak in your private moments, and the exhaustion wrapped itself around your own soul so tightly that it seemed nobody else could possibly understand the weight of it. But the deeper truth is that what you were facing was never only about your comfort, your emotions, or your immediate circumstances. There was something larger moving beneath the surface. There was resistance attached to your endurance. There was conflict attached to your calling. There was opposition attached to what your continued obedience would mean in the unseen realm. That is why the battle seemed to press on so many layers at once. It was not content to wound your feelings. It wanted to distort your sight. It wanted to make you interpret delay as abandonment, pressure as punishment, and weariness as proof that you were never meant to carry what God placed in your life. It wanted to reduce everything to your immediate pain so you would forget that some battles intensify precisely because something larger is at stake. When heaven has marked a life, the struggle around that life often carries a spiritual dimension that cannot be explained by ordinary frustration alone. You were not imagining the weight. You were discerning part of it without even having language for all of it. This is where Elijah's story becomes even more revealing. His struggle was never only about one tired prophet standing alone under emotional strain. His life was positioned in the middle of a spiritual conflict over altars, allegiance, truth, and the hearts of people who had drifted far from God. That is why the moments around him carried such intensity. When Elijah stood and called for a decision, when he confronted what had been corrupted, when fire fell and exposed the difference between what was false and what was holy. The conflict was about far more than one man's feelings. It was about who would be honored, who would be followed, and whether truth would be allowed to stand in a landscape crowded by compromise. In your own way, you have felt that same hidden scale. The fight around you has been trying to affect more than your mood. It has been trying to wear down your clarity, your conviction, your trust, and your willingness to remain aligned with what God has already planted in you. Because if your inner life can be pushed far enough into confusion, then your influence weakens. If your hope can be starved long enough, then your obedience becomes harder to sustain. If your spirit can be convinced that this is only about your pain, you may never see what heaven sees, which is that your perseverance has implications beyond yourself. The enemy does not mind attacking one person if that one person's endurance strengthens many others. That is part of why your battle felt strangely disproportionate. Have you ever noticed how some seasons carry more resistance than the visible facts seem to justify? The reaction is larger than the event. The pressure is heavier than the circumstance. The fear is louder than the immediate problem. That often happens because the visible situation is only the outer shell. The deeper conflict is spiritual. Elijah knew this. The drought, the confrontation, the fear, the collapse that followed. None of it existed in isolation. His personal weariness was linked to a larger struggle over truth and surrender. In the same way, your private battle has been entangled with a greater question. Will you still stand? Will you still stay soft before God? Will you still refuse to bow your soul to despair, bitterness, or numbness? And this is exactly why heaven paid such close attention when you did not quit. Your staying was not a small personal achievement. It was an act of spiritual resistance. Your refusal to disappear was a refusal to hand over territory that did not belong to darkness. Every time you chose prayer over total shutdown, every time you chose honesty before God instead of silent inner death, every time you chose to keep walking without understanding everything, you were doing more than surviving. You were holding ground. You were saying that pain would not become your master. You were saying that exhaustion would not become your identity. You were saying that the fight could wound you without owning you. Elijah's life shows that a servant of God can become very tired without stepping outside divine purpose. That matters because many people think spiritual warfare always looks dramatic, loud, and obvious. Sometimes it does. But often it looks like weariness pressing against obedience. It looks like fear trying to reinterpret yesterday's victory. It looks like isolation trying to make a chosen person feel cut off from meaning. It looks like a soul being tempted to collapse inward after doing what was right. This is why your struggle deserves to be understood with seriousness. You were not only facing stress, you were facing a contest over what would shape your inner world, and whether your life would continue to carry what heaven intended through it. So do not belittle the season you have walked through. Do not rename a spiritual battle as mere weakness just because part of it happened inside your mind and emotions. Some of the deepest battles are fought in the invisible chambers of the heart, where no crowd sees the choices being made. That is where allegiance is tested. That is where identity is pressured. That is where purpose is either surrendered or purified. And that is also where God meets his people with a kind of sustaining mercy that keeps them from being swallowed whole by what they are fighting. You are beginning to understand now why this chapter has mattered so much. This was not random pressure. This was not empty suffering. This was not a meaningless stretch of pain with no witness and no consequence. Something real was being contested, and your decision to remain present before God even in confusion became part of a greater victory than you could measure at the time. What looked like personal survival was also spiritual endurance. What looked like one weary heart trying not to give up was also a testimony in the unseen realm that darkness could not easily claim what heaven had marked. And before we move fully back into that spiritual thread, there is one practical note for those who feel that mental fatigue, stress, scattered focus, or creative heaviness has been part of the pressure they are trying to recover from. Some listeners may want extra support for calm focus, clearer thinking, better concentration, and a more settled mind. And one option often mentioned is the Genius Wave or Genius Song, a short audio based on brainwave entrainment ideas such as theta and gamma support through sound, designed to be used for a few minutes a day. It is presented as helping with focus, creativity, memory, mental clarity, stress reduction, and sleep support, with a one-time purchase model and a refund window according to the details you shared. If anyone wants to explore it, please use only the official source listed in the description or pinned comment. Be careful with imitation pages and rely only on the official information before trying anything. And now, with that practical note placed where it belongs, return your heart to the deeper truth. The real story is still spiritual. The real battle has always been about what your soul would believe, what your life would carry, and whether you would remain standing long enough to see what heaven was protecting all along. The warning you almost ignored did not always arrive as thunder. It did not always come as a dramatic interruption or a visible sign that forced you to stop and pay attention. More often, it came quietly. It came as a nudge in your spirit, a hesitation in your chest, a sacred discomfort that would not leave when everything around you was urging you to move too fast, react too quickly, or surrender too soon. It came in the form of an inner knowing that something deeper was happening than what your emotions could immediately explain. And if you are honest, there were moments when you nearly pushed past that warning because the pain was loud. The fatigue was real, and the desire to escape felt stronger than the desire to discern. This is part of what makes spiritual battles so dangerous. They are not only fights over what happens to you, they are fights over what voice you will trust while it is happening. When pressure increases, many voices begin to compete for authority. Fear speaks, frustration speaks, wounded memory speaks, impatience speaks. pride speaks, despair speaks. And in the middle of all that noise, the voice of God may come with a very different tone. Not panicked, not manipulative, not violent. Just clear enough to preserve you, if you are willing to slow down and listen. The tragedy is not that the warning is absent. The tragedy is that pain can make a person so desperate for relief that they become tempted to ignore the very whisper meant to keep them safe. Elijah knew this tension in a profound way. After the public victory and after the intensity of confrontation, his inner world became crowded by fear and exhaustion. He ran hard, not because God had stopped being real, but because the pressure had become so personal that his thoughts were no longer governed by triumph. They were governed by survival. This is what prolonged battles do. They can reduce vision. They can narrow perception. They can make a chosen person feel as though the immediate threat is the only truth left. Elijah reached a place where the weariness around him became louder than the wonders behind him. And yet, even in that low state, heaven did not abandon him to confusion. There are times when the warning you almost ignore is simply this: do not make a permanent decision inside a temporary storm. Do not let exhaustion choose your direction. Do not let fear become your interpreter. Do not let the pain of this moment define the meaning of your whole life. You came dangerously close to doing that. There were moments when everything in you wanted release so badly that you were willing to misread the season just to make the pressure stop. You were tempted to call yourself finished when heaven was only calling you to pause. You were tempted to call yourself abandoned when God was actually drawing you into a more intimate dependence. You were tempted to agree with darkness simply because darkness was the loudest sound in the room. That is why the warning mattered so much. It was not always a command loaded with many details. Sometimes it was just enough light for the next step. Sometimes it was simply a restraint, a holy interruption that kept you from moving in the wrong spirit. Sometimes it was the quiet sense that said, not this way, not now, not from this wounded place. And what made it easy to ignore was that the voice of wisdom rarely flatters your pain. It does not always tell you what your flesh wants to hear. It may call you to wait when you want to run. It may call you to be still when you want to react. It may call you to remain open when disappointment is urging you to shut down. Elijah's story shows that God knows how to lead a tired servant without crushing him further. The Lord did not deal harshly with Elijah in his weakness. He sustained him, gave him what he needed, and then drew him into a place where he could hear again. This matters because the warning of God is not meant to terrify you into obedience. It is meant to preserve your life, your peace, and your purpose. Heaven does not warn because heaven wants to control you in fear. Heaven warns because heaven can see what your exhaustion cannot. God knows where a wounded reaction will lead. He knows the cost of choices made under spiritual pressure. He knows how much can be lost when pain becomes your counselor. You have already lived enough to know this is true. Some of the most dangerous moments in your journey were not the moments when the enemy attacked openly. They were the moments when your own weariness nearly convinced you to cooperate with the attack. Not because you wanted darkness, but because you wanted relief. That is a very human temptation, and it is one the Lord understands better than you think. Yet His mercy toward you has been to keep warning you even when you were too tired to appreciate the warning at first. Something in you kept pausing. Something in you kept hesitating. Something in you would not fully sign the agreement despair was placing in front of your soul. This is why that inner restraint should be honored. It has protected more than your feelings. It has protected your future. It has preserved words you should not have spoken, doors you should not have opened, reactions you would have regretted, and conclusions about God that would have deepened your pain instead of healing it. The whisper that told you to hold on a little longer, to stay low before God a little longer, to refuse one more lie and to not let this season rename you. That whisper was not small. It was mercy in motion. As written in Isaiah chapter 30, verse 21, whether you turn to the right or to the left, your ears will hear a voice behind you, saying, "This is the way, walk in it." That promise speaks to moments exactly like these. It speaks to crossroads. It speaks to inner confusion. It speaks to seasons when emotion is intense and clarity feels thin. It tells you that God is not silent at the point where direction matters most. Even when the path feels narrow, even when your strength feels diminished, even when you are one rash choice away from deeper trouble, the Lord remains able to guide. So do not underestimate the warning you almost ignored. It may have sounded gentle, but it carried the force of preservation. It may not have removed the battle instantly, but it kept the battle from taking more than it was allowed to take. It may not have made the road easy, but it kept you from wandering into places your pain would not have known how to escape. This is part of how heaven celebrated your endurance, not only because you survived the obvious blows, but because somewhere beneath the exhaustion, you still left room for God to redirect you. You still let the whisper interrupt the panic. You still allowed mercy to overrule impulse. And because you did, the story did not end where the pressure wanted it to end. The warning you almost ignored became one of the ways God quietly saved you in the middle of the fight. Mercy met you in weakness, and that is one of the holiest truths in your whole story. Not when you were at your strongest, not when your faith sounded impressive, not when your energy was full and your confidence was steady, but right there in the fragile place, in the exhausted place, in the place where your soul had very little left to prove and almost nothing left to hide. That is where mercy came close. That is where heaven touched the part of you that could no longer keep performing strength. And this matters, because many chosen ones have been taught to recognize God only in power, while missing the tenderness of God in collapse. But your story is forcing you to see something deeper. The God who calls you is also the God who stoops toward you when you can barely carry yourself. This is why your weakness did not disgust heaven. It did not push God away. It did not make him reconsider his hand on your life. Your weakness became the meeting place. It became the place where divine compassion spoke more loudly than your shame. You may have felt disappointed in yourself. You may have wondered why you were so affected, why the battle had taken such a toll, why your inner life felt so worn after trying so hard to stay steady. But heaven did not answer your weakness with rejection. Heaven answered it with nearness. Mercy came not to accuse you for being tired, but to hold you while tiredness was telling you that you had nothing left worth giving. This is one reason Elijah remains such a powerful companion to your journey. He was not met by God only at the altar of visible victory. He was also met in the wilderness after the fire, after the confrontation, after the public strength had faded and the private human frailty had risen to the surface. Elijah was not cast aside because he had reached his limit. He was cared for in that limit. He was sustained in that limit. He was dealt with in a way that revealed a God who understands when a servant has been stretched beyond what words can easily explain. That matters deeply for you, because there were moments when your greatest need was not another command, not another demand, not another burden to carry, but mercy itself. And mercy does not always arrive in dramatic forms. Sometimes mercy is rest you did not plan. Sometimes mercy is the interruption of a destructive thought before it becomes a decision. Sometimes mercy is the quiet refusal of God to let you go numb all the way. Sometimes mercy is a small pocket of peace in the middle of emotional weather that should have swallowed you whole. Sometimes mercy is simply this: you are not as alone as your pain is telling you. You are not as abandoned as your fatigue is suggesting. You are not as finished as the darkness would like you to believe. There were times when you kept judging yourself by the wrong measure. You thought because you were struggling, you must be failing. Because you were tired, you must be falling behind. Because your heart was heavy, you must be spiritually defective. But mercy speaks another language. Mercy understands process. Mercy knows the cost of real battles. Mercy sees the nervous system, the soul, the emotions, the memory, the pressure, and the unseen warfare all at once. Mercy does not flatter you, but it does shelter you. It does not lie about the battle, but it refuses to let the battle become your identity. It reminds you that being weak in a moment is not the same as being forsaken forever. Elijah needed that kind of mercy. After everything he had carried, he needed care before he needed more instruction. He needed sustaining before he needed assignment. He needed the gentleness of God to restore what fear and exhaustion had thinned out inside him. And that is part of what your own story has been teaching you. Before heaven asks you to run again, heaven knows how to help you breathe. Before God speaks into your next stretch of purpose, He knows how to touch the worn-out places in you that have been living on too little peace for too long. This is not weakness to be ashamed of. This is part of the sacred rhythm of being kept by a God who understands the frame of the people He calls. You did not need to be invincible for mercy to find you. You only needed to be honest enough, or broken enough, or tired enough for the false image of self-sufficiency to finally crack. In that sense, weakness became a doorway. It exposed what striving could never heal. It brought you face to face with your need for God in a way that polished spiritual language never could. And though the battle was painful, there is a hidden gift inside this chapter. You are learning the difference between being sustained by appearance and being sustained by grace. Appearance can fool people for a while. Grace is what keeps a soul alive when appearances have fallen apart. That is why you should not despise this part of your journey. Mercy met you there. Mercy kept you from hardening. Mercy kept you from ending the story in the valley. Mercy let you feel enough of your need that you could no longer pretend your life was being held together by your own discipline alone. Heaven was kinder to you than you realized. Even the pauses, even the delays, even the stretches where you did not feel productive or impressive. Some of them were mercy giving your soul room to recover under the eye of God. And if this message is settling into you like water on dry ground, let that response move in a quiet and meaningful way. You can like, share, and subscribe so this kind of encouragement continues reaching people who are carrying private weariness and need to be reminded that mercy still meets them there. And for those who want to support this work more deeply, there is also a donation option in the description, helping these messages continue to reach hearts at the right time with the right tenderness. So now breathe in this truth without resistance. Mercy did not wait for your strength to return before coming near. Mercy met you in weakness. Mercy stayed with you when your thoughts were thin, when your hope was flickering, when your soul was too tired to sound brave. And because mercy met you there, weakness did not become your grave. It became the place where heaven bent low, touched your life again, and prove that what God carries, He does not abandon when the carrying gets hard. That is why you are still here, not because you were never weak, but because mercy was stronger than the weakness trying to overtake you. Darkness could not claim you, even though it tried to surround your mind, drain your strength, and persuade your soul that surrender would be easier than endurance. It came close enough to frighten you. It pressed hard enough to leave marks. It lingered long enough to make some days feel heavier than language could properly hold. But it still did not win the right to own you. That is the truth rising through this chapter now. Darkness opposed you, but it could not claim you. It attacked your peace, but it could not seize your purpose. It crowded your thoughts, but it could not erase the name heaven had already spoken over your life. This is important, because in a long battle, the danger is not always immediate destruction. Sometimes the danger is gradual surrender. Sometimes darkness does not rush in through one great collapse. Sometimes it tries to wear you down by repetition, by fatigue, by emotional pressure, by disappointment repeated so often that your soul starts to confuse exhaustion with truth. It wants you to slowly agree with what heaven never said. It wants you to accept hopelessness as wisdom. It wants you to call numbness maturity. It wants you to mistake isolation for safety. It wants you to believe that because the battle has lasted, the darkness must somehow be stronger. But duration is not the same as authority. A fight can be long and still fail. Elijah knew what it was to stand in the middle of that kind of conflict. His story was never only about external opposition. It was about the spiritual atmosphere surrounding truth itself. He stood in a generation crowded by false worship, moral confusion, intimidation, and pressure designed to make a servant of God retreat into silence. He faced not only the hostility of visible people, but the deeper weight of what those powers represented. And yet Elijah's life proves that darkness can gather force without gaining ownership. It can threaten, it can chase, it can exhaust, it can even drive a person into hiding for a season. But it still cannot cancel what God has chosen to preserve. That is what you are learning about your own life. There were moments when darkness felt close, not in a theatrical sense, but in the real inward pressure of fear, confusion, despair, heaviness, and relentless opposition. There were times when your mind felt crowded, times when peace felt far away, times when the future looked dimmer than it should have, times when the simplest act of continuing required more strength than anyone around you could see. And that is exactly why your survival matters so much. It is not merely that you made it through a hard chapter. It is that something hostile tried to make your inner world its home, and still it failed. The failure of darkness in your life is not measured by the absence of pain. It is measured by the fact that your soul did not fully hand itself over. You were wounded, but you did not become owned by the wound. You were tired, but you did not become defined by the fatigue. You were afraid, but fear did not receive the final vote. Even when you sat in low places, even when your thoughts were strained, even when you wondered how much more you could carry, something deeper remained untouched at the core. Something in you still belonged to God. Something in you still leaned toward light, even if only faintly. That faint leaning mattered. That small remaining openness mattered. That refusal to fully belong to despair mattered more than you knew. Elijah's journey makes this plain. After his great confrontation, he entered a low and vulnerable place. Yet even there, the darkness did not get to finish the story. His fear was real, but it was not ultimate. His exhaustion was real, but it was not sovereign. His retreat was real, but it was not permanent ownership by the forces opposing him. God still found him. God still spoke. God still preserved him. That means a chosen life can pass through severe shadow without becoming the property of the shadow. This is the distinction heaven wants you to understand. You may have been in the dark valley, but the valley never became your identity. There is a holy defiance in that truth. Darkness expected more from your collapse than it actually received. It expected you to let go of prayer completely, but you did not. It expected you to stop caring whether God was near, but you still listened for Him. It expected you to harden your heart, but you remained tender enough to feel conviction and longing. It expected you to call your pain your master, but somewhere deep within, you kept resisting that agreement. Even when the resistance was quiet, it still counted. Even when all you could manage was not giving up completely. Heaven counted that as resistance. And in the unseen realm, resistance matters. The Word of God declares in John chapter 1 verse 5, "The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." That line carries more force than many realize. It does not say darkness never appears. It does not say the night is never real. It does not say chosen people never walk through frightening terrain. It says the darkness has not overcome the light. That is the sentence your story has been proving. The pressure came, but it did not overcome you. The fear came, but it did not own you. The heaviness came, but it did not extinguish what heaven lit inside you. And perhaps this is why your battle felt so fierce. Darkness often reacts strongly to lives that still carry light while wounded. A person glowing in easy circumstances is one thing. A person still carrying some trace of divine fire after prolonged struggle is another. That kind of life becomes a threat. That kind of endurance becomes a witness. Elijah became that kind of witness. Not because he was untouched, but because he remained God's even in the middle of his weakness. In your own way, that has become true of you as well. Your continued existence in faith, however trembling, has been a testimony that the enemy's pressure has limits. So let this settle deeply now. Darkness could not claim you. It came near, but it did not own the covenant over your life. It pressed hard, but it did not seize your future. It whispered lies, but it did not author your destiny. The reason you are still here is not because the darkness was imaginary. It is because the greater claim on your life never belonged to darkness in the first place. Heaven marked you first. Heaven watched you through the fight. Heaven preserved the part of you that the battle could not touch. And now, as this truth rises more clearly in your spirit, you can finally say it without hesitation. The darkness was real, but it was never final. The night was heavy, but it never became your owner. The battle was fierce, but your soul remained under a stronger hand, and that stronger hand did not let darkness claim what belonged to God. The moment heaven celebrated, you did not necessarily look dramatic from the outside. There may not have been visible thunder, public applause, or any earthly sign grand enough to match what was happening in the unseen realm. In fact, to human eyes, it may have looked like a very small thing. It may have looked like you simply made it through one more day. It may have looked like you got up when you wanted to stay down. It may have looked like you kept breathing through a heavy hour, kept praying through a tired mind, kept believing through a wounded heart. But heaven knows how to recognize the true weight of a moment. And heaven celebrated when you chose not to surrender. That is what makes this part of your story so holy. The celebration did not wait for the final reward. It did not wait for everyone around you to understand what you had survived. It did not wait for your strength to look impressive, or for your testimony to become polished and easy to retell. Heaven celebrated in the middle of the process, in the hidden turning point where your soul refused to hand itself over to defeat. The world often celebrates outcomes, but heaven also celebrates allegiance. Heaven celebrates endurance. Heaven celebrates the moment a weary child of God decides, even through tears, that the battle will not receive the final word. This is why Elijah's story reaches so deeply into this message. His life carried power, confrontation, fire, loneliness, collapse, and restoration. But one of the quiet wonders of his journey is this: heaven never stopped dealing with him as a man still assigned, still seen, still covered, even after the season that left him drained. That means there was honor over his endurance long before his journey was fully complete. Heaven did not wait until every struggle was behind him before treating his survival as meaningful. In the same way, heaven did not wait until you looked strong again before valuing the fact that you remained. You must understand what your staying represented. It was not passive. It was not empty. It was not just the absence of quitting. It was a spiritual yes in the face of pressure that had been trying to force a no out of your soul. Every time you did not collapse into permanent despair. Every time you turned back toward God after a low moment. Every time you refused to let bitterness become your identity. Heaven saw a victory that many people on earth would never know how to measure. Some triumphs are loud, some are quiet, some happen in public places. Some happen in the interior chambers of a tired heart. But heaven knows them all. There is something deeply moving about realizing that unseen obedience still carries celebration in the courts of God. The tears did not cancel that celebration. The confusion did not cancel it. The slowness of your recovery did not cancel it. The fact that you were still healing did not cancel it. Heaven was not waiting for perfection. Heaven was responding to faithfulness. Even when that faithfulness looked fragile. Even when it looked like little more than one more whispered prayer, one more act of restraint, one more choice not to walk away. It still mattered. It still rose before God as something precious. This is where many people fail to honor their own journey. You keep waiting for some grand external event before calling your endurance significant. But heaven already called it significant when you stayed in the fight. The celebration began at the turning point of your heart. It began when you did not fully agree with the darkness pressing around you. It began when your soul, though exhausted, still left a door open for grace. It began when pain did not become your ruler. It began when you bent but did not finally bow. That was the moment. That was the holy scene. That was the instant heaven marked with joy. Elijah lived through a season where visible power and private weakness touched the same life. That is one reason his story is so fitting here. It reminds you that heaven's honor does not disappear when a servant grows tired. Heaven knows what it costs to remain available after intense warfare. Heaven knows what it costs to keep the heart open when fear has already passed through the mind. Heaven knows what it costs to keep listening after disappointment, to keep trusting after strain, to keep standing after the body and soul both feel depleted. That cost was not hidden from God. It was part of what made your endurance beautiful in heaven's sight. Scripture says in Galatians chapter 6, verse 9, "Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up." That verse lands differently when you have actually known weariness. It does not speak to a theoretical struggle. It speaks to the soul that has felt the temptation to stop, It speaks to the person who has done good while tired, trusted while tired, waited while tired, and prayed while tired. It tells you that heaven recognizes the pressure of weariness and still attaches promise to the act of not giving up. That is why heaven celebrated you. Not because your journey was easy, but because in the middle of real weariness, you remained. So let this truth settle over your whole life now. There was a real moment when the unseen realm bore witness to your decision. Maybe nobody around you understood it. Maybe nobody knew how close you came to giving up. Maybe nobody saw the battle in full. But heaven saw the exact instant your soul chose to keep going. Heaven saw the resistance. Heaven saw the costly obedience. Heaven saw the silent courage hidden in your weakness. And heaven did not stay indifferent. Heaven honored it. Heaven rejoiced over it. Heaven recognized that what was happening in you was bigger than survival. It was victory in seed form. If this reaches your spirit, comment "still standing." And now keep moving with this sacred understanding. The celebration of heaven was never limited to the visible finish line. It was already present in the hidden yes of your endurance. Your continued obedience became a sound in the unseen realm. Your refusal to quit became praise. Your trembling faith became a testimony. And the moment you thought was too small to matter was, in truth, one of the moments heaven treasured most. Because when you chose not to surrender, heaven did not call it ordinary. Heaven called it victory. Your endurance activated your calling in ways you could not see while you were still inside the hardest part of the battle. At the time, it may have felt as though all you were doing was surviving one difficult moment after another, holding together what seemed ready to fall apart, protecting a small flame from a relentless wind. You may not have felt powerful. You may not have felt especially clear. You may not have felt as though anything significant was unfolding beyond the simple effort to remain. But heaven often does its deepest work beneath the level of immediate feeling. While you were focused on making it through, God was also shaping what you would carry after the battle, and your endurance was not separate from that shaping. It was part of it. This is one of the mysteries chosen ones often discover only later. You think the battle delayed your purpose, when in reality the battle refined your capacity for it. You think the struggle interrupted your calling, when often it stripped away what could not go with you into the next season. You think the long night made you less useful, less ready, less capable. But heaven sees how suffering can deepen discernment, purify motives, soften pride, and teach a soul how to depend on God with the seriousness that easier seasons rarely produce. What you learned by staying close to God in weakness may one day become the very thing that allows you to carry strength without corruption. That is why Elijah's story continues to speak with such force here. His wilderness season was not the cancellation of his assignment. It was part of the process by which heaven preserved and clarified it. After fear, exhaustion, and collapse had brought him low, God did not discard him, but God met him, sustained him, and then spoke again into his future. That detail matters. The same life that had known confrontation and public fire also had to know the hidden work of being restored and recommissioned. Elijah was not finished because he had been weary. In many ways, the season that exposed his frailty also prepared him for what still remained on his path. The same pattern has been unfolding in you. The endurance required in this chapter has not only proven that you can survive hardship, it has opened dimensions in you that comfort alone could not have formed. You have learned how to listen more carefully because you had to. You have learned how to distinguish between the noise of fear and the quieter weight of truth because the battle forced that discernment. You have learned the danger of moving from wounded impulse. You have learned the value of remaining soft before God when everything in life tempts you to become hard. Those lessons are not side notes. They are tools. They are part of the architecture of your calling. There are doors that should never open for a person whose character has not been deepened by trial. There are influences that become dangerous when they are carried by someone who has only known easy affirmation and quick success. There are assignments that require a kind of inner sobriety that can only be formed when a soul has been brought face to face with its need for God. This is one reason the battle has mattered so much. It was painful, yes, but it also exposed what had to be anchored more deeply in you. It revealed places where self-reliance was too thin. It showed you how quickly human strength can fade. It taught you not to worship momentum, appearances, or emotional certainty. It taught you to seek God more honestly. Elijah needed that deepening. The prophet who stood boldly before many still needed to hear God in the quiet place. The man who had seen public power still needed to be guided through private restoration. And after that, there was still purpose ahead. That is the key truth for you now. Endurance is not only about surviving what tried to break you, it is also about becoming ready for what comes after. Every place where you had to choose trust over panic, humility over bitterness, stillness over rash reaction, and honest dependence over spiritual performance. Something in your calling was being strengthened. You may not yet see the full fruit of that strengthening, but it is already there. It is in the way you now recognize certain traps more quickly. It is in the way your spirit is less impressed by shallow certainty and more drawn to what is real. It is in the way you can now notice pain in others with greater compassion because your own soul has known hidden strain. It is in the way you understand that divine purpose is not carried by charisma alone, but by consecration, patience, and the willingness to let God deal with you in private before you ever stand in public. The battle has left marks. But not all marks are wounds. Some marks are signs of preparation. This is why you should not speak of your endurance as though it only belonged to the past. Your endurance is still working forward. It has already altered how you will respond to the next assignment. It has already shaped the quality of your yes to God. It has already purified the kind of vessel you are becoming. When heaven watched you not give up, heaven was not only celebrating a completed struggle, heaven was also witnessing the formation of someone more trustworthy with what comes next. That is not prideful language. It is reverent language. God does not waste pain surrendered to him. He folds it into wisdom, steadiness, and spiritual weight. As written in Romans chapter 5, verses 3 through 4, we also glory in our sufferings, because we know that suffering produces perseverance, character, and character, hope. That is not a cold instruction to enjoy pain. It is a revelation of what God can produce through it. Suffering, surrendered to God, and can create perseverance. Perseverance can form character, and character can carry hope in a way that is no longer fragile or borrowed. That sequence has been alive in your life. The suffering was real. The perseverance was costly. The character is still being formed. And the hope rising now is not the shallow hope of someone who has never been tested. It is the durable hope of someone who has discovered that grace can hold them through what should have undone them. So now you can understand this chapter with greater clarity. Your endurance activated your calling because it deepened the person who must carry that calling. It trained your heart in ways promotion alone never could. It brought you into a more honest relationship with God. It stripped away illusions and left behind something quieter, stronger, and more real. Like Elijah, you are not being defined by your lowest place, but by what God did there and what God spoke after it. And because you remained, because you did not quit, because your soul stayed reachable even in weariness, the next season will not simply find you older. It will find you formed. It will find you marked by endurance, tempered by mercy, and far more prepared for purpose than you were before the battle began. You are marked after the battle, and not in the way pain once tried to mark you. You are not marked by defeat. You are not marked by the accusations that came against your mind in the night. You are not marked by the fear that said you would not recover, or by the heaviness that tried to convince you your best strength had already been spent. You are marked by survival. You are marked by mercy. You are marked by the fact that heaven watched you in the conflict and did not let the war take from you what belonged to God. The battle changed you. Yes. But it did not reduce you. It refined you. It uncovered what was real. It stripped illusion away. It taught you that endurance is not loud, but it is holy, and that a soul can come through fire carrying a different kind of strength than it had before. This is the part where you stop speaking of yourself only as someone who went through something hard, and begin recognizing that you came out carrying evidence. There is evidence in the way you listen now, evidence in the way you discern more carefully, evidence in the way you no longer trust every feeling that rises in a storm, evidence in the way your heart has become more serious about what is sacred. Even your tenderness has changed. It is not the softness of naivety anymore. It is the softness of someone who has seen how fierce the battle can be and still refuses to become cold. That is a holy mark. That is not weakness. That is a sign that darkness pressed against you and still failed to turn you into its image. Elijah's story has been walking beside yours for a reason. He was a man who knew public fire and private fatigue, bold obedience and deep weariness, spiritual confrontation and quiet restoration. Yet his life did not end in the valley of exhaustion. Heaven still had claim over him. Heaven still had direction for him. Heaven still had purpose moving through him after the low place. That is why his story fits yours so well. It reminds you that being overwhelmed in a season does not cancel what God has spoken over your life. It reminds you that divine purpose can survive emotional collapse. It reminds you that chosen people are not those who never tremble. They are those whom God keeps through the trembling. And now you are standing at the edge of a new understanding. The battle was not the final definition of your life. It was a passage. It was painful. But it was not permanent ownership by darkness. It was severe. But it was not the end of your usefulness. It was confusing. But it was not proof that heaven had gone silent forever. You are emerging with deeper eyes. You are emerging with greater sobriety. You are emerging with a testimony that cannot be faked, because it was not built in easy weather. It was formed in hidden strain, in hard nights, in whispered prayers, in small daily acts of not quitting. That is why what rests on you now carries a different weight. It has been tested. So before this message closes, let your heart become still enough to receive a prayer, not as a formal interruption, but as the next natural breath of everything heaven has been saying to you. Father, thank you for the one listening right now. Thank you that you saw every hidden tear, every long night, every fragile prayer, and every moment they almost gave up but did not. Thank you for preserving them when they were too tired to preserve themselves. Thank you for not letting darkness claim what belongs to you. Thank you for mercy that met them in weakness, for warnings that kept them from losing their way, and for the quiet strength that kept breathing in them when they thought they had reached the end. I ask that you settle their heart now with deep peace. Lift the heaviness that still lingers. Heal the places that still ache. Restore what battle tried to drain. Let clarity return where confusion has lingered. Let hope rise where fear once pressed hard. Let them know, not only in thought but deep in spirit, that they are still chosen, still covered, still called, and still held. Mark their next season with holy steadiness. Guard their mind, strengthen their soul, and let the victory heaven saw in secret begin to unfold openly in the days ahead. Amen. Let that prayer rest on you for a moment. You do not have to rush away from it. You do not have to return immediately to the old language of defeat. You are allowed to receive peace. You are allowed to believe that restoration is not only possible but already unfolding. You are allowed to stop calling yourself abandoned when heaven has been guarding you this whole time. The mark you carry now is not shame. It is survival touched by grace. It is endurance honored by God. It is the quiet glory of someone who did not understand everything, did not feel strong every day, did not move through the war without tears, and yet still did not surrender their soul. And because messages like this often find people in very private battles, let your response be gentle but meaningful. If this word has truly met you, you can like, share, and subscribe so it reaches another weary heart that needs to know heaven has not overlooked their fight either. And for those who feel led to help support this work more deeply, there is a donation option in the description. Helping these messages continue to reach people who are walking through hidden battles and need timely encouragement. Timely. Now carry this final truth with you. You are not leaving this battle empty-handed. You are leaving marked by mercy, steadied by truth, and seen by heaven. What tried to break you became the place where God kept you. What tried to silence you became the place where a deeper testimony was formed. What tried to bury your calling became the ground from which stronger faith began to rise. So walk forward without denying the cost, but also without forgetting the glory hidden inside your survival. Heaven celebrated when you did not give up, and that celebration still echoes over your life now. You are marked after the battle, and what has marked you most deeply is not the wound. It is the hand of God that carried you through it.